Welcome to the August edition of our Hot Topics webinar series. I'm Ann Wyatt, Casita Coalition board member and executive director of Smart Share Housing Solutions. Casita Coalition is a statewide nonprofit working to remove barriers to smaller, more affordable, and sustainable homes. ADUs are a California success story, with tens of thousands of units permitted and completed just in the last few years. But significant barriers remain for many homeowners, particularly those who could most benefit from the income and family flexibility that an ADU can provide. Casita Coalition and our mission-aligned partners see identifying and addressing these equity barriers as a top priority in our work. So we're especially pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on equity and ADU production, presented by UC Berkeley's Terner Center of Housing Innovation and the Center for Community Innovation. Before we get started, some quick thank yous to our sponsors. This webinar series would not be possible without the support of our sponsors and promotional partners, especially our major sponsors, Meta and Wells Fargo. Additional sponsors include the Stowers team of CrossCountry Mortgage, Building Industry Association of the Bay Area, and the law firms of Allen, Matkins, and Reuben, Junius, and Rose. And our most recent sponsors and premier members, RenoFi, Sonderpods, Golden Age Financial, Holland and Knight, and Abodu. And our mission-aligned webinar promotional partners working alongside us to create more equitable housing statewide. The Terner Center has been a valuable mission partner since the Casita Coalition launched, providing data-driven, housing-focused research and analysis. We're going to turn the webinar over to them now. David Garcia is the policy director for the Terner Center. He leads the center's engagement in local, state, and federal housing policy and supports the generation of research-driven policy ideas, proposals, and papers. David, welcome. Thanks for joining us today, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Ann, and thank you to the Casita Coalition for being such a great partner, not just with this particular piece of research, but just on accessory dwelling units and small scale homes throughout the state. So they've been really a fantastic partner in a lot of what we've done. So I want to thank you all for the great work that you do and for having us for this conversation today. And so for those of you who may not be familiar with the Terner Center, just a brief introduction. We are a housing policy and research organization at UC Berkeley, and we focus on really all manners of housing, from land use reform to the cost to build, and we've done a lot of work on accessory dwelling units, and a lot of that has been in partnership with our partners at the Center for Community Innovation, that is led by my colleague, Professor Chapple, who I'll hand it over to in a moment. But just real quick, some context for the webinar today. This is really part of what we have done recently on the research side, lifting up issues for low and moderate income BIPOC homeowners to pursue accessory dwelling unit creation. A lot of the work we have done in the past has shown that the reforms made statewide in California have had a really significant impact on the increase in ADUs throughout the state. But one of the things that we have also observed is that in many cases, the creation of ADUs happens disproportionately in affluent areas. And to the extent that we discuss ADUs as a way to build wealth, as a way for low and moderate income homeowners to get new revenue streams, to house family members, we need to understand why there is not as high as uptake in these communities as there are for others. So that was the impetus for doing the research that we're going to walk through in a moment. But today we're also joined by a really fantastic panel of individuals who also helped us with this research. So I'm going to quickly introduce the individuals who we'll be hearing from later. First, we have Nikki Beasley, who is the executive director of Richmond Neighborhood Housing Services, and who was also really helpful and instrumental in identifying the focus groups and homeowners for part of this research. We're also joined by Charles Ampate, who works with Nikki at the Keys to Equity program as a counselor in the East Bay here in Oakland. We're also joined by Iliana Nicholas, who is the director of the ADU program at East Palo Alto Can Do. And Iliana was also a partner in the work that we did. So thank you, Iliana, for being here. And then we also have Katherine Peoples, who is the executive director at HPP Cares, which is a HUD-approved finance and housing counseling agency. And she's had literally hundreds, if not thousands, of touch points with owners throughout the state who are pursuing or considering ADUs. So we're really excited to have a conversation with this group. But before, we're going to welcome Professor Karen Chapple, who is going to discuss the findings from the research that we did recently, and then we'll flow right into the conversation with the panel. The last thing I'll note before we get started is a quick thank you to our project sponsors, Kaiser Permanente, who provided support for this work, as well as Wells Fargo. So thank you for their ongoing support. Bit of housekeeping. If you have questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom here. We'll do our best to answer them either live during the panel conversation, or if you have specific questions, we may answer them directly. So please make use of that function. Also, this will be recorded and made available at a later date as well. So we'll look forward to that too. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Karen, who is actually joining us from Cornwall, England. What looks to be like a patio at a pub. So she is that committed to this work that she is joining us from across the ocean. So thank you, Karen, for joining us, and please take it away from here.
Great. Thank you so much, David, for the introduction, and thank you so much to the Casita Coalition for sponsoring this. We're really grateful to have the partnership. And I am going to turn off my video so that you, just to save bandwidth here. So as David mentioned, we became concerned about this issue, of course, because of the racial wealth gap, which is driven in part by a racial home ownership gap. So as we were thinking about ADUs and the wonderful successes of California in building ADUs, we began worrying that if we have communities of color where households don't own their own property to begin with, they weren't going to be able to benefit from the ADU revolution. And in addition, when we did some analysis of where the ADUs were being permitted and built, we noticed an interesting pattern. So on the far left here, you'll see 31% of ADUs get permitted in those areas, but only 29% get built. If you go on the far right, you see majority white communities, and you see that more get built, the dark blue, than get permitted. So something is going on where people that actually get to the point of even getting permitted still don't get to build. And that was one of the barriers that we wanted to explore in this study. So what we looked at, focus groups. We had Northern California and Southern California focus groups with 32 different participants. They were all at different phases. Some were just thinking about building. Some hadn't even looked into getting a permit yet. Others were starting construction. We also did interviews with 14 amazing nonprofit and community-based organizations. Those were some of those you'll hear from today. So the barriers. So I'm going to go right into the finding here. What are the barriers to building ADUs, particularly for communities of color? Well, obviously, and this is a barrier for other communities as well, ADUs are expensive and they're hard to finance. So, many people want to build an ADU to house their family and friends, to have more living space, to build wealth, but it can be very expensive, and there's a lot of unforeseen expenses that can come up after you start. So you might get rolling and then you find out you need to have a geological survey, or you need to have earthquake engineering done. So this can really put the ADU out of reach completely. And then you have few alternatives in terms of financing. And the Terner Center has already done tons of research on that, has a recent brief on this. So that has been explored a lot, but we heard from the community themselves just how hard it was to qualify for loans, how difficult it is when your cash out refi is limited to 80% of value, the fact that you can't count rental income, the fact that if you are retired and you don't have income, it may be very hard to get financing. So that's point number one. Barrier number two is that the process itself is just incredibly complicated and frustrating. So people pointed out that permitting processes are incredibly confusing. The language is very hard to follow. Even for people with a PhD, they're hard to follow. And so people got discouraged very quickly and felt like they need a lot of help to move forward. And then they would get frustrated with delays. There'd be delays and delays with permitting processes, and these could be really expensive. If you're like not taking in rent because you're about to do construction, and then you find you can't do the construction, right? So these delays, which an affluent homeowner can just deal with, for a low income or vulnerable or racial ethnic minority, it can be just very, very difficult to bear those extra costs of that uncertainty and those delays. And then there's the regulations and the staff too, and dealing with them. So there was sort of a feeling like the staff themselves didn't know how to advise and didn't understand the latest ADU policies at the state level and weren't in a great position to support them. One of the participants said to us, I thought this was a really powerful quote, "It felt like going to court without a lawyer." That's pretty scary. So homeowners are also concerned about the potential negative consequences of building an ADU. And that's because of the city government sometimes having a punitive kind of attitude towards people that are adding informal housing. So there's a culture of red tagging in some communities, building code enforcement, which can result in fines and the elimination of the units. You can be not permitted to have anybody live in it if it's red tagged. And that type of process has eroded homeowners' trust in the city. It's made people very skeptical of building ADUs. So here's a quote: "We wanted to do it the right way because the last thing we want to do is build and spend money and have the city come out and tear it down." So again, very, very scary kind of culture. Another barrier is just lack of information. So lack of familiarity with how to do an ADU. Despite all the wonderful resources we have out there, not everybody knows about the Casita Coalition. And so we just need to do much more outreach. And then there's simple language barriers. And this is an insight that came from the folks at the Napa-Sonoma ADU Center who translated materials, ADU workbooks and resources into Spanish and found that it would make a meaningful difference to people to have material available in their own language. So I'm going to wrap up quickly. This that came out of our interviews and also from talking to communities. So the main one is really that in order to make this work, we really need to have intermediaries. We need to support intermediaries to do the work, to do the outreach, to make sure people understand, and to make sure people have the profits, it's the CBOs that are able to connect residents with permitting staff that can help find a call, places like EPACANDO, Napa-Sonoma, Keys to Equity, LA Moss, and so forth. Highly local neighborhood-based organizations, Richmond Neighborhood Housing Services, of course. These are the ones that can actually get the job done, build the trust and provide the information. Then there's also the role of credit unions, who right now could be playing a much bigger role. We could in broadening access to financing options. They're the best we have out there, but not doing quite enough. And then there's Cal FHA, and luckily Cal FHA has the new ADU grant program with loans of up to $40,000, but we could do more. Secondly, we need a pathway to legality for informal or illegal ADUs, right? And so we have SB 13 passed in 2019. Local agencies delay code enforcement against substandard ADUs for up to 5 years. This is only in effect until 2030. We probably need to make sure it's going to go on past them. SB 1226 from 2018 gives local building officials the discretion to apply older building standards, standards that were in effect at the time of building's construction. That's another important approach. And then at the same time, we need to provide lots of technical assistance to make sure people understand the path to legality and have the confidence about taking that path. And finally, there's a number of other steps, and this has been covered in many of our other reports as well. Pre-application reviews are great. They're very helpful. We need to do code enforcement in a more strategic and sensitive way. And then, of course, application fees and penalties can make an ADU a non-starter for vulnerable groups. So with that, you can find our report at either of our websites, and I'll just turn it back to David. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen. Really appreciate you running down the results from that work. One thing I'll add is that, it's been really important to see the legislature take such an interest in increasing ADUs kind of statewide. I think now that we have a lot of evidence that there are further steps we can take to make make ADU distribution a bit more equitable. I think there is some appetite in not just the state legislature, but locally and regionally to see a more even spread of ADUs being created throughout the state. So I want to bring back our panelists whom I introduced earlier. I'll quickly reintroduce them again. We have Nikki Beasley and Charles Ampate from Richmond Neighborhood Housing Services. We have Iliana and Nicholas from EPACANDO and Katherine Peoples from HPP Cares. Really quick, I just want your quick reactions from the panelists. Did what Karen walked through ring true for you? Given your experience, particularly Nikki, Charles, and Iliana, your experience working directly with homeowners in these communities, did what you hear really resonate with you? Was there anything we missed? Anything you can expand on based on the experiences that you have had? So I'll go ahead and just throw that out to Nikki first, and anyone else, please feel free to jump in.
Well, a lot of it was, valuable, and what we have seen and heard. Something that comes up for me, which I didn't think a lot about, is the mystery of construction and development. So whether you're trying to build a 300 square foot property or 1,000 foot, it's very complicated, even for those who know what they're doing. So my thought, and something we haven't taken a deep dive, is how can municipalities have a consumer-friendly desk that's not geared toward the construction professional that can support a homeowner over the counter trying to figure it out? Because I don't think that that's something that has been embedded or a lot has been talked about. We've tried to, find ways to close the gap, but could there be a direct resource that if, someone wanted just a lay person come in, could there be some value in filling that out? The other thing that comes to mind is, the different reasons why people are pursuing ADUs and being mindful of that, because, there is this conversation about, closing the wealth gap, creating additional income. But I think the findings shared as well as we have too, that many aren't necessarily interested in the income. They're interested in the generational housing, bringing more family members to their home. And then the last thing I'll mention is the education portion outside of building the ADU, something that really lifted for us because our program does have a module series. People are very interested in learning and they want to know. And we had our module program really designed to be a part of kind of the end of the transaction. Once the person had gotten qualified, they were waiting to get their ADU built, they would get all this education. But what we found, people wanted to know before they even started the journey, like what does it mean to build an ADU? How do you work with your contractor? What are the different financing options? What does it mean to be a landlord? They were very interested in knowing that up front. So those are my comments.
Iliana, I'll kick it over to you. You probably have some similar observations, having worked in East Palo Alto. Can you maybe confirm what Nikki and Karen mentioned, or lift up any other barriers that you've noticed?
Thank you, David. And yes, I do want to echo a lot of what Nikki said. I think, as Karen mentioned in her presentation, sometimes a typical homeowner might feel like they're walking into a courtroom, underrepresented. It's so hard, even for us sometimes as a nonprofit, helping homeowners go through this process of understanding what is it that they can actually do on their property, understanding whether or not their project that they want to build is actually considered an ADU. We go through this as well. And so in some of the research and the finding that came out of this research was finding that state and local regulations are often unclear. And that is true. I think every jurisdiction sort of interpreted the state law in the best way that they could, but left out so much more that perhaps wasn't addressed. Here in East Palo Alto, EPACANDO, we're super hyper focused here in East Palo Alto. So a lot of the knowledge that I'll speak about today is about East Palo Alto specifically. So here in East Palo Alto, we have the city, building and planning departments, but we also have other local agencies that are separate from that. For example, fire, water, and sanitary. And so all these agencies have different way of interpreting. Sorry, I can't say that word. Things differently, and so it adds a lot of confusion to what can we actually do. And so homeowners are often found not having this clear, not having a clear direction on how to work with their project. So they come to EPACANDO, and we're here to assist them through sort of in this notion that Nikki mentioned, this consumer facing friendly counter, but we're officially not that. We carry that role very informally. And although our city is very open to homeowners going to them and asking them questions, there is not built trust within homeowners in the city. And that has to do because of this culture of red tagging ADUs. So because that trust has not been built, it's not there. It is difficult as well for the city to know that their homeowners are having issues with the ADU. So if the city doesn't know that these issues exist, this is why nonprofits like EPACANDO exist, to sort of bring this to the attention of cities to say, hey, your local and state interpretations are not often clear. What can we do to make that clear? I would say that was if anything, that was sort of validating our experience here in the city and as an organization working with homeowners and ADUs. And I think that was the most interesting part of the findings.
Thanks, Iliana. And then Charles, any last words there as a counselor with the Keys to Equity program, working directly with homeowners? You probably hear very specifically about certain apprehensions that homeowners might have.
Yes. Well, from our experience, the financing piece is one of the major hurdles to cross, to building your ADU. So there are so many dynamics to look at, and most of the homeowners thinking that probably they have enough equity in their property, they might easily walk through, go through the financial processes. But then when it gets to underwriting, that is where certain things come up, like students' loan, and credit issues, bankruptcy, charge-offs, all those things come to play. So all those things are sort of impeding their progress through the financing process. So that is what I would add to it.
Yeah, and Karen alluded to this earlier as well, but we've also done some separate work specifically on financing and how there's really no product at the GSE level, or the Fannie and Freddie level that can be leveraged at scale. And so that is, I think, exacerbated with a lot of low and moderate income homeowners who may not have access to traditional financing, right? And generally speaking, most homeowners are using pulling out equity from their homes if they have it, or cash savings, and that's not really if that's our primary way we see ADUs built, that's not necessarily equitable, right? So I want to bring in Katherine, because you as at HPP Cares, you interface with I'm going to say thousands. I don't think that's an exaggeration, but a lot of homeowners who are going through the ADU process, considering it, and so you have just all of these touch points with these homeowners. So I would love to hear what your experience has been and what really drives interest in ADUs for these particular communities, and what really gives them pause, and what through your counseling have to work through with these homeowners to really get them to the finish line.
Definitely. So again, thank you for this opportunity to join this panel. And I obviously will echo all the sentiments of all the comments that were mentioned above my speaking at this point. I will tell you, from the 2 years that we started teaching the education back in 2020 with 20 slides to now we teach the education with almost over 500 slides during our presentation, it has grown. The need is there. People have questions, they have the concerns. With regards to designing the financing aspect, construction, lease, protect. And the education needs to be out there. The resources that our organizations, this small few here on this group, and the other small organizations that are out there, like Napa Sonoma Center, the Casita Coalition, it needs to be more prevalent out there that our resources are available to consumers. Because what's happening from what I've seen in the market is you've seen a lot of scam organizations pop up, particularly in communities of color, because they know there's a lack of understanding of becoming a homeowner, a landlord now, to building an ADU, taking it from concept to completion. So it's imperative that education is out there. More PSAs must be done within communities, within the languaging for those particular communities. And I put the onus on the state that needs to happen in order to see success in this ADU initiative. The other thing I will echo is Nikki, showed stars to me when she made her first comment regarding the counter desk. The jurisdictions are there, and they're the ones giving, the okay for ADUs occur. So there needs to be more onus put on the jurisdictions within the planning and zoning offices to provide not only potentially one ADU advisor, but someone who's just there, multiple people that are in the planning and zoning office, to duplicate the efforts that organizations like ours are doing in educating consumers. They're the ones that really are going to say yes or no. Because I will tell you, even though we have an extensive class, and we're doing them 4 times a month now, and we're going not only from 6 to 8, but we're now up to 6 to 11 o'clock at night answering questions. People need that necessary hand-holding to get through this process. I'm so happy a lot of them have found our organizations that's free. One thing that is rearing its head is all of a sudden you have project management companies or feasibility tests that are being done that really it's something that a consumer could basically just take a visit to the planning and zoning office. But again, not knowing that. And that is, if anything, all the participants that I've had over the months, the weeks, the countless hours, they always say, I'm so glad I found this resource, or unfortunately, I spent $40,000 when I really didn't have to because I didn't know there was a resource like HPP Cares. So those are just a few things that I'm seeing out there. I definitely see a preying on communities of color because of their lack of knowledge and know-how in the ADU space.
Thank you, Katherine. I think that's such an important point, is that there is a kind of many times a vacuum that gets filled by organizations that maybe do not have the best interests of the homeowner as part of their plan. And so elevating groups like the ones we have joining us today who are doing important work connecting all the dots for these homeowners is really key, and one of the recommendations we have in our work. One thing I noticed this question in the Q&A, I want to dig into this a bit further. Iliana, you mentioned this too, but this idea of red tagging, right? This concern that a lot of homeowners have that if I kind of take that leap of faith and bring my unpermitted accessory dwelling unit to the city, am I actually going to get punished for that? That seems to be a very powerful barrier that we heard in our conversations. And so could we talk a little bit more about how often do you run into those challenges, right? Because a lot of people hear ADUs and think, okay, well, someone's building a new structure in their backyard. Many times, particularly for low and moderate income homeowners, it's actually bringing up an existing unpermitted structure, up to code, and that is for some data purposes a new ADU. But in reality, that functions quite differently than what I think a lot of people think of when they think of an ADU. So can we talk a little bit about the kind of the hesitation a lot of times from homeowners to come forward if they have a living situation that wasn't permitted correctly, like the concerns and how that stops some homeowners, and what can be done to help alleviate that stigma?
Definitely. I'll go ahead and jump in. This is Katherine. I want to speak to that because I'm now seeing the grant funds actually getting into the hands of the consumers that it was really intended for. I am finding that people are now saying HPP Cares is a safe place to ask the questions, to get the financial piece that they need in order to bring those up to code. So I will tell you, the dollars and cents of this is what comes into play. Yes, I had people who had unpermitted units in my prior classes, and we would offer our free resources. But now that they know also we are able to provide the grant funds, it has given them the light to say, hey, I'm someone who does have an unpermitted unit. I know HPP Cares is a safe place to get the information and potentially pursue those dollars. So I think it's just getting awareness out there in the multilingual, expanding our footprint as agencies so they know that we're here to help individuals get those units performing. And then, the marketability, the value increase, the safety component, all of that comes into play.
And I'll jump in and just sort of echoing what Katherine mentioned about having a lot of homeowners come to us stating that they have unpermitted units. I say that there's two buckets. There's the ones who have actually been tagged by the city, and there are those that have not been caught, right? Who have it hush hush, are very mindful on how and who they bring it up to that they do have an unpermitted unit. But I think that as an organization who has access to funding to help these homeowners permit their units, I think the city itself also has to have the political will to do an amnesty program, to do an legalization process that supports homeowners, or else you're sort of stuck with just either demoing your unit, and so it sort of feels like you're being punished for coming out and stating that you wanted to do the right thing. So in East Palo Alto, for example, we've historically been like a low-income community of color. We are Black, Latino, Latina, Pacific Islander. So multi-generational living, this communal living, this aspect of collective living, it's a strategy that has been part of our culture. as part of marginalized groups, just simply trying to exist and survive. And so ADUs are not new. Converting unused space is not new. But our city, for a very long time, just like other jurisdictions, they had these restrictive policies that did not make it easy for people to create units. So people took matters into their own hands. And because of this hush-hush culture that existed for such a long time, when we have new state regulations that say, you can go ahead and build an ADU, people can be a little hesitant. Is this too good to be true? Especially if your jurisdiction doesn't really have a clear understanding of what the state regulations are, right? And then those who have an unpermitted unit and they're told there's this 5-period amnesty, there's this 5-year amnesty period. I can come forward and get my unit up to code, and there's no legalization process in existence in the city. So what do you do? Do you just continue keeping your unpermitted unit? Do you just go ahead and demo it and build a brand new one, which costs a lot of money? And so as myself as EPA, as an organization and also a community member, I do a lot of site visits. I go to a lot of people's homes and I look at their units, and them themselves are hesitant to show me what they have, because as a community organization and one that works alongside our city, there could be this perceived notion that I might be like a city liaison, which I'm not really. I don't report to the city or anything like that. So as a community organization, we've also built the trust for people to come forward to us. And we're here, of course, to be able to help them walk through this process. It's not an easy process, not even for us. So I just wanted to go ahead and share those thoughts on that piece.
Can I add comment to this? Because we've seen this in the city of Oakland. Many Oakland residents have some structure, and that came to light as we were working through our cohorts and had to make a decision that our program would be just for new ADUs, because that's the models that were created. But the city of Oakland has been willing to try to address these units that may be, need to be up to code or be addressed. So they're using Cal Home dollars to provide a renovation loan to support those homeowners based on income levels, 80% and below. That will go up to $90,000. That program will come out, I believe, before the end of the fall. So for those municipalities that have communities that do need to address these type of units, the state does have funds. The caveat is these particular projects need to be in opportunity zones. But happy to say that the city of Oakland has been open to trying to figure it out, because they are aware that a number of these units exist.
Thanks, Nikki. That's a really good example of a city trying to be proactive about this issue rather than reactive. There was a question in the chat that I thought was worth elevating here. It was a question about, we as a group kind of talk about the benefits to ADUs for the homeowner. I think that's how many of us approach this topic. The question is really how we view ADUs in terms of maybe a community stabilization tool or a tool to help to help provide housing that is maybe not deed restricted affordable, maybe less expensive than traditional forms of housing for a renter. So really my question is for Nikki, Charles, and maybe Iliana to start, is it when you approach a homeowner or a homeowner approaches you, how difficult is a sell is it to have them pursue an ADU? Because we walk through all of these barriers. It's expensive. There's a lot of regulatory issues. It is essentially a construction project in many cases, versus the pressure to maybe just sell. A lot of these homeowners may have a decent amount of equity in their homes, especially in the last few years because of high home prices and inflation. Is it sometimes easier for those homeowners to say, I would prefer to just sell my home versus go through the process of developing an ADU? And how do you work through them with that, having that pressure on them as well?
I'll start and then let Charles chime in. So Fortunately enough for us, through our outreach, when people come to us, they have an interest and desire. So it's not a heavy sell trying to convince them this is something to do. I think where the challenge becomes is as we start to understand what their affordability is, what their credit needs are, what the financing options are, can their property support it? That's where then managing the expectation of the participant becomes a challenge. But what we have found that everyone wants it because they've been hearing about it and happy to know that there has been some focus and attention in our program focused on the Black homeowner that, again, they're eager to know. But where it gets, kind of weird and wonky is as we start looking at their financial DNA and figuring out how to fit them into what resources are available. Charles, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I'll say a lot of these homeowners primarily don't have their minds on renting the ADU out. So most of them want to have extra space for their family, so that they would all kind of be in the same household. So about, I would say about 40% of the interest forms we received were looking at renting their ADUs out.
Thanks, Charles and Nikki. I'll just add some points to the question as well as, we've observed that many times the ADU itself, from a tenant perspective, can be more affordable than traditional market rate housing or housing on the open market. This is actually something that Karen, Professor Chapple's work has illustrated, that many times these units can be less expensive. And maybe not necessarily traditional deed restricted affordable, but they can be offered at lower rates for homeowners who are interested in putting these on the market. We've also observed some examples from other cities where they have allowed more ADUs on a lot in exchange for deed restricted affordability. We've seen some cities pursue or provide construction financing in exchange for renting to a housing choice voucher holder, something like that. So there are ways in which cities and other organizations are thinking through ADUs as a positive means for the tenant themselves. So I wanted to put that out there too. So one thing we heard a lot about in our work, and as I've heard here, is the financing issue. And there are some programs now that are trying to address this by providing some resources. So case in point, the CalHFA ADU program offers up to $40,000 now for individual or homeowners who are interested in building an ADU. So I guess I want to start with you, Katherine. Have you seen some uptake of this program? And it's relatively new, but has there been some interest in this? And then also to the broader group, have you been able to layer in the support provided by the state through this program to help get homeowners to get projects to work for their finances?
Definitely. With the increase in the dollar amount, there was also an increase in the income guidelines. So we've definitely had a tremendous uptick. I will explain our program to the listening audience, just so they're clear. So we're a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. We also provide the education. But with our program, we are allowing consumers who had already accessed cash through cash out refinances or HELOCs prior to interest rates going up. Because what CalHFA was experiencing is they noticed that with all the participating lenders, there was a requirement for consumers to do a refinance. And thus that didn't set well with a lot of households. So there was a bit of a stop in getting application submissions. They thus opened the floor up for an organization like myself to come in and now work with people who had already access to the cash on their properties. So we've seen an uptick in that in all income levels. Initially, it was the higher net wealth individuals, and now we're now seeing families come in that are in the lower to moderate that are looking to participate in the program. But again, not to beat it down, but at the end of the day, the issue still is meeting the financing. Consumers need product, either prefabbed units or some type of unit that is cost that cost a certain price point so they can participate in the ADU initiative. And that'll just be my comments. I don't want to steal everyone else's thunder. So I'll pass the floor over to Nikki or one of the other panelists.
No worries, plenty of thunder to go around. So yeah, again, everyone else, have the efforts to provide, financing support at the state level, or really even local examples. Have those been effective, and have you been able to use them with homeowners you're working with?
I will tell you, yes, there are a couple of credit unions that as soon as our organization popped up on the slide or popped up on the CalHFA website, reached out to us, let us know that they do have a product that they're going to be offering, and ultimately are now providing that information over to us. So it's kind of a building the plane and flying it at the same time, because now there is a way for consumers to access those grant funds through our organization where there wasn't before. So there's many phone calls that I have gotten from other institutions, major banks, that feel they have a product that can meet the middle. So I will tell you, since our approval over the last couple of weeks, there have been some changes that are going to meet that need. It's just as soon as I can actually have a meeting with them, hear what it is, and then get it out to the consumers.
And I will just say the same. Our lender partner, Self-Help Credit Union, has just gotten on the CalFHA platform. And since then, we've gotten an abundance of calls through Self-Help asking about, the availability of those funds and how they can participate in the Keys to Equity program. One of the reasons that the credit union was selected is because we were able to create a portfolio, leverage their portfolio product to bring in some of the enhancements of a product that I think David may have mentioned earlier. GSEs don't have the same flexibility. So we're continuing to try to be innovative and creative using the institution's latitude, because it is their money, as a portfolio product, to make some of the financing adjustments. But some things we can't get around are the interest rates. That really has kind of skewed opportunity, because if a borrower, got a mortgage 5 or 6 years ago at 3.5%, very hard to, convince or make it make sense. And we definitely don't want to cause any harm of being in the 5.5% interest rate. So external, factors are definitely impeding some of these challenges.
And just so I can go in on this, chime in on this conversation. So EPACANDO, we're not a counseling agency. We're not a CDFI. We're not a lender. These are goals that I hope to be one day. But we have partnered with the city of East Palo Alto to administer the city's Cal Home Grant into loans for homeowners who would like to build a new ADU or to rehab or repair one. As a nonprofit, we are exploring ways in which we could provide funding to our community as well through, for example, like a community revolving loan fund, backyard leases. That is a concept that's existed for a while. But we're doing some pilots on that type of financial products. So I think as much as there is needed help to support homeowners with their projects and their hopes of becoming ADU homeowners or builders, there's also this need to support community organizations like ourselves. I mean, I know that some state laws have written or have enabled the possibility of nonprofits being owners of ADUs. So therefore, to me, that sounds like being also ADU builders, developers. And so I think there's also some support in that as well, especially if there's the aspect of speaking about ADUs, helping homeowners pretty much build units to help house their own family members or their own community members. But as nonprofits, could we also build and acquire ADUs to help support increasing affordable housing in our communities that are facing displacement, communities where there's multi-family buildings that are unfortunately overcrowded. So how can we alleviate those conditions as a nonprofit as well, at the same time as helping homeowners generate this equity and rental income and helping their own families?
Iliana, it's funny you should mention that. RNHS's first experience in the ADU conversation, I think, happened back in 2017 when I first got on board with the organization. Because we own a number of a number of single family homes in the city of Richmond that had a lot of backyard space, and we were approached about building ADUs. And one of the reasons that we did not pursue, because we didn't have the financing tools to be able to do it. And I do think for nonprofits like us that maybe have property that could leverage land to do it, or can purchase land to do it, that then becomes another conversation about what will be those funding options and tools to support those type of transactions, because in the affordable housing hemisphere, it's very limited to the type of funds that are available. So if you're not building, multi-family, hundreds of units, you don't have access to state funding, similar in municipality. And then when you go to city funding, then it becomes conversations around the AMI levels that you're serving are not enough of a pool to be able to really generate the type of units that one would like to consider. So I do, like the idea that that's being lifted up, because nonprofits, many of us are in space to be able to support things like this, but then we too have a list of things that we need to make these things happen.
All great points. Thank you, Nikki. I want to ask really quickly, there's a comment in the chat about how some cities are using state funds to improve their processes, to cut through some of the regulatory barriers that that we heard in our research, and I think you've all experienced on the ground. Things like providing pre-approved ADU templates, expedited processing for ADU permits, things like that. So my question for everyone is, are these helpful? Have you been able to leverage these kinds of process improvements to get homeowners to successfully build ADUs, to lower the cost, provide more confidence that the process will not be as daunting as it might seem from the outside? And if not, why, and what else can be done at the process level?
I think in this space, yes, the resources are there. Consumers are now accessing them. Where there is a lack of success and then moving forward in the ADU project is because consumers want the handheld. They need the handheld experience through this. What we have to realize is we're expecting homeowners to now go from owning a home to now understanding construction to now becoming a landlord. And tons of dollars can be put into the building and planning offices, but if there is not a connection with the housing counseling agencies that are within the jurisdictions and the building and safety departments all speaking together, we're not going to see successes in this. Not to mention a requirement with any funding that goes out pertaining to ADUs, whether it's the smaller dollar loans, or there's grants like College FA, it must be tied to education in order for us to start to see successes. We've done our best to try to educate as many consumers, but other housing counseling agencies should be providing it. The resources should be there. And I guess where I'm at with this is housing counseling organizations are always the last service looped in after the fact. We've got a mortgage meltdown, we've got a mortgage crisis, and housing counselors are here to save the day. I really honestly think that, we need to be brought to the table initially when some of the framework is being put together on a lot of these programs, so that you can get our insight, a very important insight, because we are the feet on the street, the frontline troops that are engaging with consumers, and really, ask us, pick our brain with regards to what would help move this thing forward. So I implore any cities and counties that are out there, bring in your local housing counseling agencies. to help you put your packaging together so we can start to see some successes. And I knew Nikki was going to chime right in.
Don't start preaching up in here. And that really was the catalyst of Keys to Equity. We built it on what we do on our day-to-day as a housing counseling agency, and why I think the value has been successful, even though it hasn't gotten us to building an ADU. We didn't just throw the client to the lender and have them go through the process and hear a lot of no's. We created a buffer so that we could package and position the client so that by the time it got to the lender, it was, as good of a package, and there hopefully would be no surprises. As well as through our counseling, understood that we had to have a pathway to be able to address all the things that we considered would be a challenge, like the education, very similar to our pre-purchase and group sessions, like our counseling, reviewing the application, reviewing their interests, determining what the needs were, creating a network of partners like we would finding, real estate agents and or lenders. So we really use the nucleus of what we do as a housing counseling agency to create the Keys to Equity program. And to Katherine's point, agencies are a underutilized resource. They tend to be the afterthought. There's a problem we need you to solve. And if we are really being transparent, housing counseling really lost their luster after the 08-09 crisis because people weren't buying houses. Many housing counseling agencies ended. So there's not enough of us now that we have all of this nuanced work. So we need to bring some of these agencies back to help with some of the capacity needs that are being discussed here today.
That's great. Thank you both very much. I think we have time for about one more question. I want to ask something slightly different. Someone mentioned in the Q&A about these A to Z, soup to nuts ADU companies that can do everything for you for maybe a piece of the rent, right? So in some respects, you can see this maybe perhaps as a positive, as a group could do everything that's a homeowner doesn't have to do it. On the other hand, a lot of times this kind of approach has not proven to be very equitable in past instances, right? And so I guess my question for everyone is, if you had a client who was considering, entertaining an offer from a group who would like to build an ADU in their yard, what would you tell them? And I think more broadly, like, is the development of these of this business model or industry, could it be positive for low and moderate income homeowners, or do we need to think more critically about these approaches?
I'll jump right in. So there was a model like that here in Southern California that particularly piqued my interest because I knew they were targeting South Los Angeles homeowners, communities specifically of color, with an all-in package that we will help you do everything ADU, including find your tenant, and you'll get mailbox money. And so in doing my inquiry, I kept asking, hey, I run a housing counseling agency. I have a tremendous footprint, would love to help promote your business. And every time I tried to ask details or got additional or was asking about contractual things so that I could understand it and really be able to speak to it in my educations that I was providing for the ADUs, I was always met with, oh, we'll get it to you, we'll get it to you. That entity has thus no longer continued to do their work from my understanding because there were some inequitable things within their contractual agreement. So I will say that if an organization is true to the mission and really wants to create housing and really wants to support lower income families with that type of program, great, have at it, but make sure everything is fair and equitable. Okay, if you're going to do a whole all-in program, do it, but at least make sure that the mailbox money is not $50 to maybe less than $200 with regards to the rent. And I would obviously consult a local housing counseling agency to ensure that your contract meets what it should in what this quote unquote mission is. Because again, they led with, we're a mission-based organization, we're going to provide ADUs, all the languaging was perfect, but at the end of the day, it was predatory at its finest. So
so I'll chime in and sort of, so a lot of, I get emails and calls almost on daily about ADU companies, similar to what you explained, the ones that do all the nuts and bolts, that want an in East Palo Alto. They would like me to help them advertise to our homeowners. EPACANDO, we went through an experience where we piloted a company like that. And it didn't work out so well for us. And so we're still dealing with the impacts of that. So I'm very hesitant, and I would admit to gatekeeping at this moment from keeping for stopping this happening again in our community. And also helping, I don't know how to explain this in words that don't sound controversial, but our communities of color are often treated as guinea pigs. Like, let's try it out and see if it works in this community, and then we'll go from there. And so that's something that I wanted to be very hesitant and aware of, that we do not do more harm than good, and that extends to the companies that work in our community. So I think with the rise of these companies, it seems like a lot of them maybe are figuring things out as well, just like we are figuring out how to best help our homeowners. And so there seems to be, that discrepancies and difficulties in piloting them. And so I am still out there looking for one that would fit everything that we will want a company to do and be for our community.
Right. Nikki and Charles, I'll give either of you the last word on this.
So I haven't personally seen them, one do all type of thing. Comes to mind, I would say it depends. Wouldn't put a blanket statement that they're all bad. It just kind of depends on who's representing, who's the face, and who's the people trying to get in front of our folks. And to get to Iliana's point, our communities tend to bring no value until there's an opportunity to make a dollar. So I would just be sensitive that if they are creeping up, just do your due diligence, understand what they can do. In our work, it's really hard for me to believe that one company can do it all, because each individual issue is different. So I don't believe that, it's a one solution base, because every client is going to have a different need. So be interesting to see.
David, we're at time here, so
yeah, so I just quickly want to thank everyone here for their participation, Nikki, Charles, Iliana, and Katherine, and also just for the great work that you do, and thank you all for that, and for sharing that experiences you've had from that work with us here today. I want to also thank Casita again for convening this conversation. I'm going to hand it back to Anne, who's going to quickly close things out, and also thank you to everyone who's tuned in. There's a ton of conversation in the chat. Couldn't get to everything, but thank you all. Really appreciate it. But Anne.
David, thank you. And on behalf of the Casita Coalition, we're grateful for the partnership with the Terner Center, and we're grateful to all of you who attended today, and particularly for our panelists. We invite other small housing professionals, community-based organizations, and homeowners to add your voice and join the conversation by becoming a member of the Casita Coalition at casitacoalition.org. You'll find lots of resources on the website, guidebooks on multiple subjects such as garage conversions, ADU finance, and other things, including links to our webinar library, which will include this webinar and many others, and resources for both ADU professionals and homeowners. Next month's webinar hot topic is climate change and small housing on September 30th at 11 a.m. You can keep up to date by joining our mailing list or becoming a member of casitacoalition.org. Thank you all, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month.